I do want to say how delighted we are to host Orhan Pamuk tonight for a discussion of his new book. It's called Strangeness in My Mind. We were just trying to tally up how many books he's actually written. I thought it was 11. It turns out it's more like 15, 16, or 17, depending on languages, translations, whether, in vaults or not, published. In any case, he has written many books. And as with so many of his previous works, this one centers on characters straddling worlds divided by time, faith, class, ethnicity, culture, and place. Few contemporary writers anywhere in the world so thoroughly capture the human dimension of modern life, with all of its tensions, paradoxes, and absurdities. A master storyteller, Mr. Pamuk always manages to evoke the unique spirit and character of his native Turkey, while also exploring universal themes and emotions that compel readers far beyond his country's borders. He first aspired to be a writer at about the age of 23, and in the decades since, he's become, in the words of a recent reviewer, a giant of world literature well wreathed in laurels. His books have been international bestsellers, translated into more than 60 languages, and he's won awards far too numerous to list here, but I will mention one, and that's the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2006, which came with a citation that said, quote, "In the quest for the melancholic soul of his native city, he's discovered new symbols for the clash and interlacing of cultures." Tonight, Mr. Pamuk will be in conversation with Elliot Ackerman. You may have visited him when he had an event at Politics and Prose earlier this year. That was for his debut novel, Green on Blue. It came out, I believe, in February. It grapples also with people, cultures, and values colliding in war, and specifically the war in Afghanistan. Mr. Ackerman spent nearly a decade as a Marine and a CIA officer in both Afghanistan and Iraq. He was awarded the Silver Star, the Bronze Star for Valor, and the Purple Heart. And most important for our purposes tonight, he lives in Turkey, where he writes about the war in Syria and is raising 2 kids and has a wife there and is learning restaurant Turkish. It's such an honor to have both of them with us tonight. It promises to be a marvelous and fascinating conversation. Please join me in welcoming Orhan Pamuk and Elliot Ackerman.
Well, thank you to Politics and Prose for hosting us, and it's a real honor to be in conversation with you.
It's also an honor for me, of course.
Yep, thank you. So I thought we could start at the beginning with the title of the book, A Strangeness in My Mind. But also, what really struck me is in the opening pages, the book's title is not only A Strangeness in My Mind, but then its subtitle is Being the Adventures and Dreams of Mevlut Karataş, a seller of Boza, and of his friends, and also a portrait of life in Istanbul between 1969 and 2012 from many different points of view. So I imagine some people in the audience might have read the book. Some will be picking it up tonight, hopefully, with an autograph. But in reading the book, it's an expansive novel, as the subtitle shows. And I was hoping you could talk about it and what it's about. I know you mentioned to me, too, there's sort of a passage that really hits home for you, and maybe you would share that with us.
Now that you have read, can I also use my opportunity to read something?
Please.
Now you refer to the title, which is Being the Adventures of Dreams of Mevlut Karataş, so forth and so on, is an 18th century picaresque novel subtitle. Novels or books have titles, more or less, until recently, they sum up the book because we go to a bookshop and there's no internet, not much reviewing. You go to a bookshop and look at these strange things. The title shows what's inside. Say, You read 2,000 pages, you look at the cover, it says War and Peace. More or less, you have an idea about what's inside. Or you read Stendhal, the Black and the Red, which is about soldiers and priests, or religion and army in modernization of France. So I always worry about the title. I'm planning to write an essay about the policy of titles, but my titles tend to be not War and Peace, the Red and Black, or David Copperfield and the Karenina. It's about Madame Bovary, it's about someone probably. In my titles, I think that the title should be not a summing up strategy, but something that will add a final twist to the story, so that when you close the book, you think, what's this all about? Oh, it says War and Peace. No, it's a strangeness in my mind. And then you ask, oh, what does he mean by that? Say, I have a book called White Castle, and the White Castle only appears 2 pages. But it's towards the end of the book. It adds one final twist to the story, and in an uncanny way, or I hope in an uncanny way, represents the mysteries of the story rather than explaining it or giving it away. But now thinking that summing up, doing in 18th century novel, picaresque novel kind of little summaries. Right. And I also teach at Columbia University a course called Art of the Novel. I have these sets of problems. Why I'm referring to teaching at Columbia, it's this time. It's because of this. Sometimes we discuss Anna Karenina. And I said, at the end, as you know, as she was going to commit suicide, and some of us say, oh, sir, don't tell us the ending, spoiler. And I get very upset, and I say, in an old-fashioned authoritarian way, I say, no, this is not a book club. We are in Columbia University. And argue, give a long monologue about a novel is not its plot nor its story. A plot and a story is something that holds all the dear things that we want to talk about, all the important things that motivated us to write that novel. That plot, storyline, holds them together. And in order to prove to my students that plot doesn't matter, in my next novel I'm teaching at Columbia for the last 9 years, I put the summary of the novel at the beginning, which I'm going to read. This will make things easier for you and for Elliot and me, because this is the summary of the novel, and it's the first paragraph. This is the story of life and daydreams of Mevlut Karataş, a seller of Boza and yogurt. Born in 1957, 5 years younger than me, on the western edge of Asia, in a poor village overlooking a hazy lake in central Anatolia, he came to Istanbul at the age of 12, living there in the capital of the world for the rest of his life. Now, when I wrote, the editors in Yapı Kredi Publishing in Istanbul, when they saw Istanbul, the capital of the world, they said, Orhan, take it easy, calm down. A lot of discussions, and I'm successful, it stayed. Yeah. When he was 25, he returned to the province of his birth, where he eloped with a village girl. Now we are in page 200. A rather strange affair that determined the rest of his days, 250. Returning with her to Istanbul, he got married and had 2 daughters. We are about 300. He took a number of jobs without pause, selling his yogurt, ice cream, and rice in the street and waiting tables. But every evening, without fail, he would wander the streets of Istanbul selling Boza and dreaming strange dreams. I'm not going to read the whole of it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, it's a strong and expansive title, and it seems like a departure from Snow.
Yes.
Why Mevlut is a street vendor? Why Boza? What is the significance of this? He could have sold anything.
Okay, I started this book as a short novel, like many of my books, and whenever I tell this, I tell, don't forget Ulysses, James Joyce Ulysses, started as a short story. And with the story was very simple, that a street vendor loses his job because of modernization. When I was a child in Istanbul in 1950s, yogurt was a product that was sold by street vendors who were carrying poles over their shoulders, and the trays were tied to the end of the poles. In early 60s or mid 60s, yogurt was a product that was bottled, glass bottles, ceramic bottles, plastic bottles, cartoon bottles, paper bottles, so forth and so on. Then I wanted to write about all these details about the street vendor. Then, of course, where does the street vendors come? I asked this question myself, and they come from poor Anatolia, and they built their own houses, shanty houses, with their own hands. And I begin to interview people, because though I have lived that period of Istanbul, in Istanbul, I was a middle class, upper middle class bourgeois boy, but this life, though I have seen it from afar, those Turkish shanty houses, Turkish gecekonduz, they are better than, say, Brazilian favelas or Indian or Bombay slums, but they are in the end gecekonduz. And I have seen them from distance, and I regret not having gone into it earlier. So I begin to, the book is, I'm telling in a way, is based on interviews. So once I begin to do these interviews, what some other people call research, but research sounds very formal and means labor. I was enjoying myself a lot. I begin to think that the book is getting longer. So I decided to write an epic about a man and cover this whole distance. Boza was interesting me from beginning from 1950s, because my grandmother, just as I described in the novel, will say in cold winter nights, open the window, and in the fourth, fifth floor of the apartment building, we would hear the Boza vendor saying, Boza, and then, Boa, come up, or he would come up, and it's very mysterious. It's for the child, because he is a poor man who just came from rural poor Anatolia, selling things to upper middle class secular Istanbullus. One thing. Another thing, answering why I choose Boza. Boza was a slightly fermented drink enjoyed by not only Ottomans, by also North Africans, people of Balkanic languages, and northern Black Sea, southern Russia. Mostly, it was popular because Islam forbids the consumption of alcohol, while if you drink 4 glasses of Boza, it would be equal to 2 glasses of beer. And Ottomans knew it. The pious, let's say, I wouldn't say Islamists, but religious Ottoman sultans would go in disguise at night and close not only the wine shops, but also Boza shops, while the others didn't, some of them didn't care. But after the Kemal Atatürk's implementation of secular modern Turkish Republic, you don't need Boza anymore. You can enjoy beer, you can enjoy wine. Kemal Atatürk opened monopoly of wine and rakı. But I argue, and all the Boza sellers who I interviewed know about this, it's the ritual or the sound of the Boza seller who's saying Boza, which reminds us old times, that makes the sale possible.
Right, and that, it really struck me in the book. You write, Boza, Mevlut would cry out toward the eternal past.
Yes.
I thought that it really strikes a chord of, what is this idea of, of Turkishness.
Yes, but when you refer to eternal past, that's of course Ottomanness, not Turkishness.
Yes.
This is something that international journalistic community and some of Turkey caught up with in the last a decade and a half during the reign of AKP, or Turkey's ruling party, because they have a tendency to glamorize the Ottoman past, something that we did not have in the first 3-4 decades of modern Turkish Republic. I'm not upset with it, but I don't buy too much too.
But I think there's that idea that it's not, the Ottomanness isn't necessarily Turkishness. I mean, that it was an incredibly multicultural, pluralistic society, and that sort of is the eternal past. And what also really strikes me in the book, in the novel, I mean, it is, it's a love story. I think it's a political story, but it's also an immigrant story. There are parts of the book I was reading, maybe being my own nationalist, saying this feels like a very American story, but it's not, because it's an immigrant story.
Okay, I'll answer both. Love, politics, and immigration. Where do I begin? Just choose one subject.
Sorry, big question. But I think, do you feel that it is an immigration story?
It's an immigration story, but there are limits to immigration. Say there are Syrians or Afghani people who are immigrating to Germany, and the change, the distance they are covering is immense compared to Mevlut, because Mevlut is not traveling in religion, language, even passport. He is in the same country, same language, language, and same culture, and same religion. While some immigration, as in the case of what's happening in Europe now, there is a change in religion, culture, language. Not only that, there is a change in say, immigration from Syria to Germany or Europe is a change in civilization, while Mevlut travels lesser. While things, in a way, I'm saying, things are easier for him. Even class difference, because Turkey was not that rich, or compared to today, in late 60s and early 70s, Turkey, compared to today, was a poor country. Everything is relevant, of course. And he comes from an extremely poor place, but that is, the economical distance is also relatively small. So his immigration is a lesser problem. Also, he has already his father and his uncle in town. They already built a house, and he moves in with the pretext of there is no secondary school in his village. Most of the immigration that I have learned about is during the little boys at the age of 11 come to town with an excuse of helping their fathers and going to school, because there's no secondary school in their village, while their father is mostly either is a street vendor, or if he or she is lucky, is working in a factory or in a little production something.
So the structure of the book is very interesting to me. Mevlut is not a singular character, but he's in that he has a similar background to many of the other characters in the book, but he's obviously singular as a novel's protagonist, and he's the only character whose story is told in a very close third person, and the rest of the characters are told in the first person. And so I hope you would talk about the structure, and I hope you would also talk about the picture you use to depict Mevlut's sections.
Okay. Now I'm happy with this question, because
Oh, good.
it's a literary question asked by a novelist, and he pays attention to the details, structural navigations, innovations we may have. The novel has, now that the postmodern in me is not dead, but is slightly doing things, still doing things, it slightly has some originality. While it reads like a 19th century classical novel, Dickens-like, Balzac-like, and it has aspects of an old-fashioned novel. Suddenly, we hear the novel is unfolding, it's third-person singular. Suddenly, one of the characters, and we know which one characters because his or her name is above, begins to talk first-person singular. For me, it doesn't upset the reader, so was the readers of the book say so too. I like this sentence. Why did I do it? Actually, I did so much research, and there is so much information. It was okay with Mevlut first person singular. Mevlut was doing this, he was doing that. When you write a Flaubert-like novel in first person singular, the lexicon or the words we choose sometimes may get close to protagonist or character's mind, and sometimes to the objectives, like Tolstoy. Napoleon's armies were invading Turkey or whatever, or there was another military coup and this happened, that happened, street vendors were pressured, something like that. Then the language gets closer to the protagonist and it works. But I felt also all the interviews I did with these street vendors, from sellers of stuffed mussel to rice and chicken sellers, all the people. I also talk with the retired chief police officer managing whole Beyoğlu, you would know, and Taksim, and all of that. So the authenticity and reality of their voices I couldn't represent. And I decided to use their language, their words, their anger, and cut it short instead of introducing and saying this is this and so speaking and he is this and that. Suddenly you see these characters' voices popping up in a Balzac-like novel in first-person singular, and it works. But once from that voice, we again want to return back to Mevlut, the reader will be confused who's speaking there. To avoid that confusion, I introduce little pictures of Mevlut, which is also on the cover of Turkish edition.
Right, and it's in the it's the last page of the
There
US
is
edition.
that picture is also taken from a great Istanbul photographer, one of Ara Güler's great photographs. We developed that from a photograph.
Would you also talk a little bit, because I made mention that the novel is a political novel. And it almost feels like a classical nonfiction book. Like there's an index, and there's also.
We'll come back to that. Okay.
Right. There's
Okay.
the
Let me go to
index.
politics first. Okay.
And then, we don't have to go to politics.
Okay.
Go on.
No problem.
But
Okay.
there's an index in the book. There's also chronology in the book. Why did you? In the chronology, why did you feel compelled to put the chronology in there?
Okay, but now the questions: political novel, chronology, index. I'll start with politics.
Okay.
Mevlut has his politics, but he doesn't have strong political ideas. Why? And this is, I'm also now talking as if I'm teaching at Columbia University, Art of the Novel, I'm sorry. Why? Because I choose Mevlut's character. I wanted a character, and I have met and talked with Mevluts also, who can navigate to conservative, Islamist, right-wing quarters and circles in Istanbul, also to secular, leftist, Alevi, Turkish Shia. He has friends like that, Ferhat. But if you have strong opinions, strong politics, you cannot have both right-wing or semi-fascist characters and left-wing semi-communist characters simultaneously, because you would be angry to one. So Mevlut, and in the end, Mevlut is like, say, 90–80% of citizens of Turkey. He doesn't care much about his political views. He cares more about making ends meet, and his shop and his business flourish. Everything after that is okay. I'm sure he's also voting like that, unfortunately. What was the next question?
I wanted you to talk about the way the book feels like a political book, like a U.S. political book with an index and a chronology.
Oh, you said not political in that sense, but social book.
No, it feels like a nonfiction book, and so it's a postmodern novel, but
okay,
the use of the chronology and the use of the
but
index
this is
gives
not
it that feel.
This
and
is
I
not the
wanted
first
to-
time I'm doing that. In Museum of Innocence,
Right.
I also
Yes.
did that. In my reprinting of my old books in Turkey, I'm also imposing to my publishers that not chronology with old novels, but definitely an index. Why? Because we novelists are conservatives. And nothing in our craft, both usage of forms, the way we write. Yes, we are not handwriting anymore, though I am, but 99% of the novelists are now using a computer. But the rest of our craft doesn't change much. As a novelist, I'm also happy about that. What a great form. Although the world, technology, our mental capacities, and our comforts and traditions are changing, the whole project of writing a novel, putting it on covers and publishing it, not changing. But then I thought, I say, Anna Karenina. I like some parts so much, but some parts I don't care. In War and Peace, I don't care about war pieces. I care about peace pieces, dancing and on.
That's funny because I care about the war pieces.
Yes, I can imagine that. Which means that if there is an index, so what? It helps you to read the novel. It helps you to remember the novel, really. And there's no problem with it. Some people said, some readers said in Turkish, it's a spoiler. You may read an index, and well, you can read the ending of the novel first. What can I do? Don't read the index if it spoils your pleasure. While it helps you for re-enjoyment of the novel. Chronology is, yes, it's a postmodern thing. This is definitely not a social novel. This is not an academic. I'm not an academician. It's a playful novel, but if you put a chronology and treat, say, Mevlut first time goes to porno movie and a military coup in the same level, thus saying to the reader, this is a history based on individual story that I care about, that putting on the same importance, something very trivial about, but important for that person, and also very important social event in the same level is important for me. Also, again, implying that, yes, this novel has self-imposed ambitions of being a social history of Istanbul between 1970 to today, chronicling the development of the town from 1 million to 15 million. When I was born in 1950s, it was a city of 1 million. When Mevlut comes, actually, in 1970, it was a city of 2.5 million, and the book ends just 2014, when it was 15 or 16 million. And all these people who come from rural, poor Anatolia attack all these lands in the peripheries of town, and with mafia kind of organizations, or organizations that help them to implement themselves in town, building their houses, getting lands from local people, some of them official, some of them semi-official, some of them all fake papers to lands, which after 40 years, there are 40-story, 30-story high-rises. Right. This is the story that the novel is covering.
Right. So after a little bit of a workman-like conversation of chronologies and indexes, I thought we might point out that it is a love story.
Yes.
Most fundamentally.
Yes. Okay. My previous book, my novel, Museum of Innocence, was also a love story. It was a love story seen through the eyes of an upper middle class Istanbul spoiled bourgeois boy who treats his beloved with his compassionate, obsessive love in a very bad way without even realizing that he is treating her bad, legitimizing his bad behavior by love. Unfortunately, this is how upper class Turkish men fall in love. Avoid them.
You got a lot of applause for that.
There are some victims, it seems. Now, Mevlut is a lower class, and his infatuation has something similar to, because both the upper class and the lower class fall in love in a Muslim society. Well, for the upper class, it is unfortunately cult of virginity. Though he feels as if they don't care, they care so much about it. The story tells in Museum of Innocence. Here, that is not a problem, while I really paid a lot of attention to make my Mevlut a good man. But here, I am arguing this. Mevlut comes from a rural, poor Anatolian town. He is, in many ways, at the beginning of the novel, not modern much. But on the other hand, after the first 10 pages, Mevlut is modern. This is a modern novel about modern people in Istanbul. Modern, for my lexicon, doesn't mean that something that takes place in West or Europe. They are in many ways modern, and the story is living the peasant mind or the peasant conditions, and they live in modern city. But on the other hand, modern or not, in an Islamic society, meeting the girl and the boy does not meet much before marriage. They don't do flirting, no sex, of course, very little flirting. So how to put love on a pedestal? The other guy in Museum of Innocence puts it on a pedestal. At least they have sex. But here, he only sees her 3 seconds before the marriage from a distance and falls in love. And this is when the novel is also about that kind of love. You have to fall in love to be able to get married, because you have to convince yourself that you want to spend the rest of your life with this person, no matter how sexually hungry and how psychologically lonely you are. I am, in a way, showing that all the history of Ottoman, Turkish, Persian, non-Western rhetoric of romantic love is based on not knowing the girl too much, not knowing the boy too much. Half of the story is about that. Then, not knowing the girl too much, he writes to her 3 years of heartfelt, really, love letters. Then they marry. Whatever, I won't tell. It won't be a spoiler, don't worry. And then their friendship I cared about. Everyone told me I was not that aware. Wow, what a happy couple they are, in a way. Because they're friendly. They talk about everything in earth and everything about their daily lives at night, though he's working so much to make ends meet. And he's a positive guy, and he is extremely friendly with his wife, perhaps. This is not the wife he wanted to marry, but he's happy about being generous, perhaps. We don't know. We novelists don't know why this or that character is behaving like that. We also follow our own humors, our instincts. This story would unfold and would look not even rational or reasonable, but would look fine with this. You don't, yes.
Yeah, I was because that's a theme that comes through very clearly that you're exploring, is this idea of whether or not we are judged based on our intentions or on our actions.
Good question again. A subject that the whole novel, if there is any metaphysics or philosophy in the novel, philosophical aspect, is that Mevlut, my character, sees a girl from a distance, like all Turkish rural boys in a wedding, and weddings are for that. You marry one guy and you prepare the ground for another 50. Sees the girl from a distance and writes letters. But then they cheat him and give him at night, elopes with the wrong girl.
It sort of reminded me of the story of Jacob, Leah, and Rebecca. Were there stories that sort of, there's these classic love stories. Were there any that were in your mind as you were writing?
When I wrote this, when the book was published, all the other stories like that began coming. But I'll tell you, Tolstoy also married like this.
Oh, yeah.
He wanted to marry this girl, then he married her sister. It happens a lot. Or Itala Svevo, Confessions of Zeno, the famous novel, is also about that. And also it's a biblical story. It's a very traditional story. In the end, you understand, modernity is about living in villages and living in cities. No matter what you have in your mind, once you begin to live in a city, more or less everything changes. The way you talk to your wife, the way... Mevlut's difference is that he doesn't go to coffee house at night and chat and lacks community of male macho friends and watching TV, because he has to do business at night.
Right.
That saves, I think. And he is instead friends with his wife. I would say that there is one political propaganda in this book. It is be friends with your wife. Most of Turkish men are not.
Well, I think this is a favorable crowd to that. So one character we haven't talked about directly is, Istanbul is clearly a character in this novel, and I know that you had a history, a great affinity towards painting, and I wonder almost, I mean, the writing style, it's almost like I can see you painting the city
Thank
in
you.
the book. Did you feel that way in writing it, the onus of
No,
creating the city?
I will be very fast in this. Between the age of 7 and 22, I wanted to be a painter, encouraged by my family, who are all civil engineers. Seeing that I am the black swan in the family, they wanted, black sheep is the right word, they wanted to encourage me. But I also went to the same architectural school my civil engineer grandfather, father, uncles went. Because I'm considered an artist, I went to architecture. But as I was studying architecture and painting heavily, thinking that I will be like Le Corbusier, both painter and architect, suddenly a screw is loose in my mind and I begin to write novels. But 10 years after I managed to successfully implement myself as a Turkish novelist, everyone begins, I realized that I'm a visual. I'm expressing myself more visually, seeing the scene visually. I'm not the only one. Tolstoy, Proust, Nabokov evokes a scene in our imagination, in our mind's eye, through pictures. When we read a scene by Tolstoy, it's very memorable. We also see some colors, a color of the light, the atmosphere, one or two objects. After telling this to my students at Columbia University, and I say, Dostoevsky does none of this. You don't even remember any object, but he is the deepest of all novelists. I don't know why.
So I think I have time for one more question, and then we'll
Yes.
turn over to the audience. And I'll give you just a brief one. Your work has often been described as nostalgic. Do you agree with that
I
assessment?
disagree with that.
Why?
Also, I wrote two things that I disagree with reviews of this book internationally, is that one of my books, Istanbul, explores the theme of melancholy or Turkish melancholy, hüzün. But not all of my novels are melancholic. Also, that book perhaps may be a bit nostalgic, but not all of my novels are nostalgic. This novel does not suggest in any way, let's go back to 1970s and they were doing shanty town so beautifully, or street vendors were working so hard and was getting paid so little, that was great. Let's go back. I'm not saying that. It's not a nostalgic book. My other books say Istanbul, which is my memoir till the age of 23. And in 1974, around the same time that this character for this book comes to Istanbul, may have some readers think nostalgic because I was writing about my childhood, 1950s, 60s. But even in that book, I was not saying, let's go back to these beautiful days. Or even if I don't say, let's go back, wow, those days were beautiful. Maybe every writer says about his childhood, it was beautiful because perhaps most of the time it seems beautiful because when you're young, your memory is so full, so strong that you remember all the details and everyone thinks that you love it because that's why you remember it. Actually, we remember it. I think nostalgia is a good critical feeling, but especially in a person like me, it will be politically wrong to live in Istanbul for 63 years and be nostalgic. Yes, there may be some nostalgic impulse in me about Istanbul of my childhood, 60s, 70s, but that has also a political meaning that I don't want to subscribe to. That means, oh, Istanbul was so nice when it was a million. We were all happy being bourgeois together. Suddenly these 15 million people came from poor Anatolia and changed my city. I would never say that. I am with 16 million Istanbuls. We are all in the same boat. And in fact, that's why I wrote this novel. The duty of the novelist, if ever there is a duty, I don't think there is ever duty, we feel moral because we are good citizens. The duty of the good citizen, if he or she is a novelist, is to identify people who are not like ours. Humanity has one strength that no one has. That is, we may feel the feelings, pain, jealousy, love, failure, happiness of others and identify them. and even see the world through their own eyes. In fact, that's why we read novels. We read novels because we want to see the world through other experiences, other beings, other eyes, other cultures. See how the world is seen from other points of view. That's why we write novels. Novels are both self-expression. I wrote novels, Black Book, which is all about me. And I wrote this novel, not necessarily all about me. While I also identify Mevlut, the whole project was writing about a lower class street vendor and expounding, enlarging, exploring his full humanity in such a way that it will be laid for 600 and more, whatever, 600 pages. Once we have that strength, it is normal that we novelists identify with people who are not like us. And that's the joy of this novel. And that's why, maybe I'll tell this and finish, all my childhood reads and teenage years, even in my early 20s, my friends told me, Orhan, you have a strange mind. Then one day I was reading William Wordsworth, and I came across, there's a strangeness in my mind. And I said to myself, one day I'm going to write a novel with that title. It happened to Mevlut. Thus, I gave him some of my romantic imagination that I share with William Wordsworth.
That's right. Well, thank you. And I think with that, if there are any audience questions, we could take them now.
I guess this is an advantage of being close to the microphone. Reading your book, I felt that Mevlut didn't really make any big decisions in his life, even his decision to get married. But he's content with not being such an ambitious person. Whereas here in the U.S., we are always told to be an individual, choose your own path, be ambitious. So how do we reconcile these two?
I think Mevlut makes big decisions. The normal thing that is expected of him when they send him, not the girl he wanted to marry, but his not looking that beautiful sister, he chooses to marry her. But I also agree with the idea that dramatization of major choices in our lives, that should what the novels tell us about. But if the curve or the I would say the angle of these decisions are only too big if the characters are aristocrats or warriors. All epics, big epics of the past are about great warriors, fighters, big men, whose decisions influence the life of the nation, while Mevlut is not a big guy in that sense, and I am happy he is not. That's why politics is at the back, at a sort of a formal background in this novel. Mevlut is not a big, important person. In fact, deliberately so. He is an everyman. But the book argues that because art of the novel never gave us an everyman with full individuality. My modest contribution, I don't know whether I succeeded, is here to write about an everyman, but treat him like Ivan Karamazov or Hamlet, and try to produce his humanity, everything about him in a dramatical way, also saying this is important. Not because he's an aristocrat and who has power to change the nation's history, but he's just an everyman.
But I think he, in the novel, he represents, I mean, so many people, and they kind of become
We don't know.
that.
We hope he
He seems,
represents.
but he's,
Yes,
he
yes.
seems to take on that persona.
Do you enjoy writing, and was there ever a time that you didn't enjoy writing?
Um, Generally speaking, we say, I like writing, enjoy writing, but moment by moment, second by second, it's not that enjoyable. I'm, uh, I'm not saying that it's all terrible, no, but there are, in many authors, very happy moments and very desperate or pessimistic or depressive moments. But on the other hand, I am doing something I want. I'm talking to my beloveds, my friends. I am 63. I have enough money in bank, enough security. I don't have to do anything for 30 years just to continue this life. And what do I do? What if they say, whole vacation till the end of your life? What do I do? In fact, I want to do what I'm doing now. If they say, you have three hours, oh, let me go on and turn around more sentences. I'm working all the time, while it doesn't feel like work. Most of the time, my psychology is I feel like a child who's playing with his toys and forgets time. Someone opens the door, are you still here, or something like that. While, of course, there is also the social side to our business. Your books are published, your publishers invite you, you talk about them. I also enjoy them. But writing is always a challenge. You want to write a better sentence, and also the damning thing is that you can, if you give more time, you can improve it. You can improve this sentence. You can improve this last page. You can re-improve it again and again. So you work and work and work, and you enjoy doing it. If you don't enjoy doing it, you won't do it.
Thank you.
Hi there, thank you. You've been a very engaging speaker. I was in Turkey in May and staying in a tiny little apartment hotel near the Galata Tower and befriended the concierge, and she was very helpful taking me. I had to go to the pharmacist and this and that. And before I left, she gave me her copy of your book, The Museum of Innocence, so she wanted me to read it. She said, this is the most famous author in Turkey, and this is my favorite of his books. So I thought that was very sweet. But do you mind if I ask you a political question? Because it was just before the elections then, and the flags were
But
flying.
you read the book, didn't come to the museum?
No,
The
I
book
read
gets you
when
in
I
for
got
free.
home.
Doesn't the book get you in for free?
Yeah, but I didn't get to read it till I got
okay.
home. But so I followed the elections the first time around, and then the recent ones last week or whatever. Could you talk a little bit about your worry, or if you're worried about? Everybody I met there said they felt like about 60% of the people are secular Muslims.
Maybe I'll tell you this. I am living in this country, Turkey, for the last 63 years. After the age of 17, 18, I was also, like you, interested in politics, like everyone else. And all election nights was now, my reaction, my family's reaction was like you. Wow, what a bad election result. How are we going to survive here? The liberal reaction to elections in Turkey was always like this, and no one cared, and you are unhappy with your solitary liberalism. I'm happy that this tendency is now spread to the United States. This is not the first Turkish elections that made me unhappy, but let's console ourselves. In the previous election, all the liberals in Turkey were happy. And then they were hoping for more. And I was telling my friends, well, this happens once in 40 years. Don't be that optimistic. What was surprising was that the polls misled us dramatically. The pre-election polls were saying entirely different, and that was a surprise. But on the other hand, it was not such a big surprise for me. I know how to be patient. We all should always demand free speech. Free speech is curtailed, is in a horrible situation in Turkey. Journalists are beaten or sent to jail. This is enough to see the situation. But on the other hand, this party, that party, I'll tell you honestly, 20 years ago, what this party is doing, previous secular parties were also doing the same things. So in the long run, yes, let's defend free speech, journalists' rights, the rights of the minorities. These are the things that I believe in. Whatever party gets in power should give us that. We will ask that. That's all I can say.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I would like to ask about your museum. I'm working with a group to create a museum to celebrate the great American writers, but what has been the experience with your museum, and are you now going to open a Boza bar?
No. But what do you want me to talk about?
What's it been like to have the museum, and what has the reaction of the visitors been to the museum?
Okay. I'll give some basic information to those of you who do not know about Museum of Innocence, which is both a novel that I published in 2008 and a museum that I opened in 2012. Actually, I wanted to publish the novel as a sort of an annotated museum catalog and publish and open the museum the same day, but it took longer to finish the museum. The conceit was that I open a museum which exhibits objects that the fictional characters in the novel may touch, use, remember, or landscapes, photos, films they may have seen, and make it a modest city museum of Istanbul between 1950s and end of 20th century. Thinking that there will not be pictures in the annotated museum catalog where the annotations are manipulated in such a way that it reads like a novel. I finished the novel, published it. I finished the museum, opened it, and I also wrote, since the novel doesn't look like a museum catalog anymore, a book called Innocence of Objects, which is a real museum catalog. The number of visitors to the museum is averaging 35,000 a year, which makes me, I'm not putting any money from my pocket. 6 people are working in the museums, and their salaries are covered by the tickets. We're not getting any money from the rich or the government, but in the future we may hope to get, but I'm worried about that future day. More or less, this is the subject. 65% of the visitors to our museums are tourists or international people, like all museums in the world, or international museums, so to speak.
Or I feel like I would be remiss to the people of Politics and Prose if I didn't say that if you go to the museum with a copy of the book, you get it for free. So maybe pick up a copy.
Yes, yeah.
Sorry.
There is also a ticket in the book.
Yes.
If you go there, yes. I'm sorry to make you waiting.
Not at all. I wanted to ask you about your involvement in the translations of your books and whether you read them in translation, and how do you feel that represents what you've written?
The only second language I have is English, and I think so. From the beginning, all of my translators do the work, then send me the thing. Then I take my pencil and work over it for a month. Then we meet and sit at a table and fight and argue and argue. Not necessarily all the time. Sometimes they're beautiful, or sometimes I say there's something missing here, but I don't know what it is. Or and do a lot of work going over word by word everything. Now we have Skype with the translator. Great translation that Ekin Oklap did for this, a wonderful translation, and we did that work through Skype.
We had friends who went to Istanbul and said, you have to go see this museum. I hadn't read anything by you at the time. So read the book, went to Istanbul.
You don't have to necessarily read the book.
No, saw the museum.
Sorry?
We saw the museum, bought the museum catalog. I'd have to say it's like the most encompassing artistic experience of my life, right? I mean, it's literature, it's a museum, there's sounds, there's music.
Thank you.
There's kind of everything but dance.
Everything but?
But dance. There's no dance, I don't think, right? So you kind of talked about the specifics of the museum, but I was wondering what it was like doing that process of writing a book and building a museum catalog and just going back and forth between the two.
I don't know what to say. I'm happy to hear. It's very sweet of you to have said all that. We all expect you in Museum of Innocence in Istanbul. As Elliot said, if you buy a book, you already have a free ticket. What's the next question?
Thank you. Did you name your hero Mameluke because Mamelukes were children either brought or stolen or kidnapped or bought from the Caucasus? And do you somehow wanted to put a part of you into this character? And as a follow-up question, did your Circassian heritage somehow influence your views on what's going on in Turkey and in general?
But I didn't particularly understand it. Can you translate the question?
It was that, did he name Mevlut, why did he give him that name, and was it because that is a character that, that represents people who've come to Turkey from the Caucasus?
Right.
Yes.
I see, but Mevlut is not a Cherkess. I have some Circassian blood, but this is not an ethnic story. Mevlut is from Konya. And in the end, in his story, his ethnicity, he's not aware of it, and he doesn't talk about it, and it's not transparent. It's not in the book. In A Strangeness in My Mind, ethnicity is important only for Kurds because it's very political, and it still is very political. Yes.
So my cousin and I have started a two-person book club online. She's in New Delhi and I live here. And the first book was Museum of Innocence, and we're still discussing it. The new book I haven't read yet, but it appears to be the sort of poor man's version of Museum of Innocence.
It's not.
Not?
It's because there was a question about love, and I said, in my part of the world, love story is always somehow intertwined with Islam, because men and boys, because of really men and boys don't get easily together, even if they have pretensions of being upper class. And also, these stories belong to 1970s. Also, attitudes and culture is also changing. Moderns are not like Mevlut or Kemal. They have also changed.
So my question was, we struggled a little bit in Museum of Innocence in the middle, I would say 200 pages with his obsession.
I'm sorry.
But we love the end. We absolutely love the end. And my question is, was this a metaphor for something, or was it pure obsession?
It's me.
Was it? Was it really?
I wrote a book called Naive and Sentimental Novelist, which is actually a compilation of my Norton lectures in Harvard University about art of the novel. There, I tried to answer the question all novelists consistently, systematically ask, and of course, when they ask you that question, they will never believe your answer. The most popular question we novelists in the history of art of the novel have asked is, whatever the subject, love, war, this or that. Elliot, did you really saw all that? And if you say no, they won't believe you. If you say yes, they won't believe you. Or so many variations. In the end, in that book, I argued that in fact, the strength of art of the novel is such that it doesn't matter whether you say yes or no, that when we read a novel, our minds do many, many things simultaneously. When we read a novel, we don't only read the words and follow the storyline, but we ask ourselves many questions as well. We are like a car driver who changes gears, who looks at this, looks at the mirror without noticing it and talking to someone, right? And we are amazed, how can he do that? We also do 10, 12 things simultaneously when we read a novel. And one of the things we do is to ask ourselves whether he or she, meaning the novelist, had invented this. Did Eliot live this? Witness the details of this horrible or whatever scene, or did Tolstoy saw that? Did he really fell in love like that? did Pamuk fell in love like the one he described in Museum of Innocence? These we constantly ask when we are confronted with a strange detail, because it convinces us and we wonder, did the writer, he or she, invented this thing? Or you cannot invent this. It's so convincing and beautiful and unique. Probably he lived it. As a novelist, I'm jealous about other novelists' detail. Wow, what a detail. Of course he lived it. He cannot think of this. Or the other way around. Sometimes some details comes from life, but they're not good. Then they think, oh, what a bad imagination this guy has. And the writer says, no, I lived it.
Or a friend of mine who's a poet says one of the things he loves about being a poet is there's no distinction between fiction and nonfiction.
Yes,
there's no difference
That's
in
why
poetry.
we are all literary, right? Yes.
Okay, we're going to end with those last 3 questions.
Okay.
I was just wondering how much your writing style kind of consciously evolved over time, or how much you were writing in the same way that it sounds like you were influenced a lot by Tolstoy and some other authors, and how much you kind of have an organic writing style versus how much you've consciously
Influence, of course, comes from desire to legitimate your story, your form, what you want to write about. You want to write about, say, love, you say, well, Tolstoy wrote about it, Nabokov wrote about it, Proust wrote about it, I'm also going to write about it, So influence comes from that. Or structural innovations or structural models. You need models. There is no text before a text. All texts are about previous texts, plus our individual experience. Writing is about A, tradition, point. B, freedom, innovation, imagination. We are not slaves to history or history of other texts, or history of the nation, or history of the community, or weight of the tradition. Yes, I care about them and I know it. But I'm also free. I can invent, I can change around. So, yes, to start with, you need previous texts. If you're young, you're more influenced. But then you have your own experience. When I began writing novels, and as I said at the beginning, a screw was loose in my head, and I stopped studying architecture and began to write novels, and everyone was disappointed in my family, and my father's friends and uncles, all the uncles in the family were telling me, you're writing a novel at the age of 23? You don't know anything about life. And my answer at that time, you think literature is about life? Ha! It's all about literature. I'm writing a novel which is about literature, not your life. Now, 40 years passed. Now, with this novel and all other things, my style is perhaps changing. I agree with all these old uncles who are dead now, unfortunately. Yes.
Merhaba.
Merhaba.
It's a pleasure. I'm curious to find out, winning the Nobel Prize affected your writing in any way? Obviously, now that you can reach much larger and diverse population.
Okay. The time I received the news from my agent, it's 6 o'clock, I was in New York, my first impulse was, this will not change my life. That's what she always tells me. Perhaps because I was in the middle of Museum of Innocence. It did not change or affect my life in any negative way. I'm telling this because all the questions journalists and people ask that you want to say, they want me or any receiver of Nobel Prize, and I see it in newspapers, they always want me or Nobel Prize receivers to say something bad about, oh, the phone is ringing all the time, I don't have any life of my own, so forth and so on, and they love it. Actually, it's not like that. I recommend it to everyone. One last question.
Merhaba. My question is, what is the common feedback you received after this book from local people, from local mevluds?
Okay, good one. Local, of course. I hope local mevluds were reading it. In the end, art of the novel is we are writing for people who read novels. It's my most popular novel before this in Turkey was My Name is Red, and it sold, say, 250,000 copies. This sold in 16 years. This sold that much in 16 weeks. And some people said, now that you were going to ask a question like that, wow, you write about Turkishness. One of the reasons of popularity of the book. Or perhaps I didn't publish a book, a new novel in Turkey in the last 6 years. Another reason. And during that 6 years, Turkish book industry and readership flourished so much, perhaps because of that, perhaps because of this. But Turkish readers love this book more than anything else. And if I have any problem, I feel that in other countries, my editors will tend to say that, Orhan, this book is too much Turkish. While I'm happy to do so, and in fact, I don't think this is a too much Turkish story. It's a universal story about growth of towns. Our future will be in this, what we call in towns. I'm a very happy person in the sense that when I was born, as I said, Istanbul was 1 million, now it's 16 million, and in 63 years, I have witnessed all this from inside. Something that happened in 200 years in New York, 250 years in Paris, although it's also happening in 20 years in Shanghai. But the horrors of future of humanity, the horrors we will see, will come from this cancerous growth, which has no center, no controlling mind, and no controlling of what we call developments of cities, high-rises, beton. Now, when I was born, only 20% of the population was living in towns, and now statistics and scientists are saying 60-70% of Turks will also, and then majority of humanity will soon live in towns, and we will be living in jungles of beton with high-rises. It's okay, but it's not controlled enough. There is no central planning. They are cancer-like economical growths. This novel, in the long run, I hope, will be enjoyed or seen like this, while it's a modest Mevlut's Turkish story.